Hey everyone, Nick here. So in this episode, we're going to talk about three things. One is how to use models to represent data and functionality. We're going to update our code to make our screens dynamic and not hard code any data in there. And also we're going to be covering Dart concepts such as generics, the map function, anonymous functions, and cascades. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to be going through this blog post as I go through the lesson. And you can find the blog post on fluttercrashcourse.com and then go down to the episode Working with Models here. If you want the code, the link's in the blog post right here. You have to just check out this branch here I have highlighted to actually have the code we're going to be implementing. So let's talk about the significance of an app's data model. So a data model is something very, very generic to any kind of app. It's not only Flutter apps. It could be a web app, just a traditional app, software application, or it could be a mobile app, doesn't matter. So a model is basically a glorified class in Dart. So when we have an app that we're going to write, the app usually has input and output. So like any software program. So the input of the data is going to be probably some data we fetch from an API somewhere. So it could be a Firebase API or a normal traditional HTTP based RESTful API. So that's the input to our app because the data is coming into our app. But the problem is when we take that data into our app, we need to represent it somehow in memory. And that data might be complex. It might have different types of data with different types of fields to it and properties. And also that data might relate to each other in different ways. So let's say we have our Tourism & Co app here. The input of the data would be a list of locations that can be shown to the user. And each location could have a list of facts of that location, like fun, interesting things that you want to show to the user. So if we want to represent that data in our app, we're going to create two classes, a location class and a LocationFact class. And we're going to have a relationship between them. So the model also represents the relationships between different pieces of data. So the location model or class, if you will have a list item, a member that's a list, a Dart list, that's going to be a list of facts. So there's a one-to-many relationship between location and LocationFact. So all of this data taxonomy and all that stuff, we're going to represent in classes, and we're going to call them models. That's just like a terminology that a lot of people use. So when we fetch the data from the API, we're going to write certain code that creates instances of the location class. And when we want to use that data in our app, let's say we load a given screen, let's say we load a location detail screen, we can easily work with that data if we have them cleanly separated into separate model files. So again, scrolling down here, we have the model's location and LocationFact that we're going to create in the lesson. And again, it's going to be a one-to-many relationship. So that's more coming from database design terminology, one-to-many and all that stuff. But that's just like stuff that you should know as well. You could use that not only for databases, but also for how your models relate to each other in your Flutter app. So this is how we're going to use our models. I'm scrolling down here. This is how, just as a given use case of how we're going to use our models. So our app loads. And then since we don't have multiple screens yet in our app, we're going to do that in the next lesson. We have a single location detail screen. It's going to load. We're going to say, hey, just give me like from a list of given locations based on a location identifier or ID. We're going to also add that in this lesson. Give us the name of the location and then render it in the navigation bar. And then for each location fact, again, it's a one-to-many relationship between location, LocationFact, render a given text section on our screen. So right now, as you can see in my simulator, I have 3 text sections. That's just hard-coded. So what we're going to do is update the code to render a given text section based on each fact we have associated with that. It could be 1 fact, it could be 5 facts. It depends on the location instance we're rendering. So how do we add our models? So basically, I'm going to show you the best practices for when you're adding models, where to add them, and also how you can use code commenting and what the best practices are to make sure that if anyone else is reading the code, that it's easy to read. So let's get started. The code example that we're going to code is in this blog post. So I am going to open my basically, I'm going to open my code here, and I'm going to explore here, and I'm going to create a directory called models. So basically, in terms of code organization best practices, in the lib directory, there's going to be a sibling directory to screens, the screens directory that we have, and we're going to call it models. Then we're going to create a new file called location.dart. And now we can, let me increase the size, we can just implement our location model. So it's going to be, again, a class, and each class in Dart is going to be in title case, meaning the first initial of every word is going to be capitalized. And I'm going to have three fields here. I'm going to have string, a location has a given name. It's going to be, let's see, image path. And then it's going to be a list of location facts, final list location fact. And I haven't created that yet, so it's going to have an error here. Facts. And then I'm going to update a constructor so that I can create this model very easily. So we've gone over this before, but we're going to use a shortcut here where if we use this.name, this.imagePath, and this.facts, we can, the constructor will automatically assign the values you pass in to your members. And that way we don't have to actually implement the class, like the constructor like this. And we've gone over this previously, so I won't go over that too much. And then we're going to import, a file we haven't created yet, locationFact.dart. Make sure that the name of your model is in single case, like a location, because it is one given location. So don't make it plural. And also that goes for the file name. So I'm going to create a file name called LocationFact, not facts or anything like that. It's a one single fact. And a location fact, again, it's title case. Let's see what we want. It's going to have a title and a text. Let me just paste this in because it's faster from the blog post. It's not rocket science here. So a location fact is going to have a title and a text. And that's really it. So no errors are here. That's great. So yeah, let's see. So let's talk about how we're going to add business logic to our model. So business logic, again, is just a glorified term for just some code. And there's some rules to that code based on your business or what you're trying to accomplish. So we're going to implement that. And one traditional way to implement business logic is you can add them to the model directly if it's not such a big app. If it's kind of a small to medium sized app, a lot of people just add the business logic and core functionality to their model. So let's say I want to get a list of locations. I'm going to add a method that fetches those locations, and I'm going to add that method to the location class. So that's pretty much a common approach. So in this method here, I'm going to implement that. I'm going to paste this in because there's a lot of code here, and I suggest you not typing it in because it's tedious. You can just check out the code here. Let's go through this. So this is going to be a function that's static, and static meaning you don't have to instantiate location to invoke the function. You can just say fetchAll. So this is going to be a function called fetchAll. It's going to fetch all the locations in our virtual database. It's hard-coded now, but in a few lessons, we're going to fetch it from an actual backend API. So we're going to say fetchAll. And this is not a realistic fetchAll function because usually you would add pagination parameters, say fetch from 1 to 10 or whatever, or fetch numbers 10 to 20 or all that. But this is very trivial example, and it's going to return a list of locations. So each location we're going to call is the constructor. We're going to pass in name here, and this is the path to the image and all these. And then it's going to be a list. And for each list item, we're going to instantiate a location fact. So this is going to be summary, how to get there, etc. So it's really ugly now, but once we have an actual web service API hooked up, this will all go away. And also note that for now, we are using this kind of ordered parameters for our constructors. If you're having a lot of parameters, there's another way of doing that we'll cover in another lesson. But for now, this is like the simplest way. Great, so we have our models. Let's continue. So let's make our code dynamic now. So we're going to take and use this fetchAll function, and we're going to update our location detail screen. So let's import the location class, and we're going to update the following. We're going to update the app bar title, we're going to update this image banner, and then we're going to iterate over every fact of the location we're going to load and render a given text section. So how we're going to do that is a simple way at first. We're going to load all those locations in the build method. So we're going to say location.fetchAll, and then we're going to assign a given location. So for a given list, locations is a list type. There's a special kind of property called first, and that's just like saying like this basically. And right now we don't have multiple locations. We're going to implement the next lesson. We're just going to assume we just have one location because we're just loading a location detail screen here. In the next lesson, we're going to pass in an identifier to location detail screen and then load it by identifier. Another word before I continue is that usually you don't want to load data in the build function because the build function of any widget can be called multiple times. So we don't want to be doing that. But just to get it to work for now, we're going to be doing it here. And I'll explain in later lessons how the kind of ideal way to do it. So now we have access to our given location. So I can update the title here, and I could say location.name because location has a name property. As you can see here, this is the name property. And then I can say in the image banner, say location dot image path. That's another property here. So let's reload that, and it looks like it's working pretty well. So what are we going to do with each text section? So basically, in Dart, there is a special function called map, and what a map does is it converts a list or an array. In Dart, it's called list. Of stuff to another list, but of another type of data. So if I have a list of, let's say, strings, I can use map to convert it to a list of actual objects, like a list of widgets, right? In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to have a list of location facts, which is an array of, I'll show you the model. It's going to be this data type, list of location facts. And again, just touching over this again, this is what we call generics. So we've went over this in the last few lessons, but I want to refresh real quick before I continue. It's going to be a list of location facts. So generics is basically the ability to define a given type for specifying the type of something. So you have to specify a list of something. You could say list of string, you could say list of integers, and in our case, we're going to have a list of location facts. So that's what generics is. Anyway, the map function was we're going to say for a given list of location facts, we're going to convert that to a list of widgets of type text section. So that's what map does. It transforms one type of list into another type of list. So how are we going to do that? Let's make a function where we're going to take all this stuff, we're going to cut it out, and we're going to say some list of widgets, and then we're going to just add it in here after the fact. So before we go ahead and do that, let me implement a function that returns that list of widgets, that implements our map function. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a list of widgets that the function is going to return. And let me look at the code real quick. What we're going to call it? It was called text sections. So the blog post I just brought up has the kind of final implementation, but I wanted to do it from scratch here. It's going to take a single location, and that location we're going to say location.facts. Again, it's a list item, and we're going to say .map, And .map takes what's called a anonymous function. In other words, it's another word for it is a closure in Dart. And closures are something very pervasive through other programming languages. And the syntax is just kind of weird. A closure or an anonymous function is a function, but you don't give it a name. It's anonymous. You don't have a name for it. So f is our function. And we're going to implement our function right in here. So the function, because how a map works, the function will take one single parameter, and the parameter is it's a given fact. So anonymous functions in Dart have three parts to it. The first part is the actual list of parameters of the function, just like any other function. This is the list of parameters, and the number of parameters that's available is defined by this actual map here. So we know that if we click into it, this is pretty cryptic. This function that it's defining that we pass in will only allow us to have one kind of parameter. But I wouldn't look at this. This is pretty complex. Anyway, it's a list of parameters, and then there is a arrow here. It's called what's it, rocket notation or something, which is saying, hey, we want to define a single line implementation of our function. So in theory, we can do this. We can use curly braces and implement our function here. But what this arrow does is it lets us define, if the function is a single line, it lets us define the function as a single line of code. So we can say, and whatever we define here as a statement, it returns. So we can, if we want to return, let's say foobar, we can do it like this, right? So what we want to do is the implementation of this is return a text section. So remember, we had a text section widget here, and that's what we're going to implement. So text section. And then for the fact, we're going to have fact, what is it? A fact has a title and text. So fact title and fact text. So this, again, as I said, just to go over this one more time, and because you're going to be using this a lot in Flutter apps, is map will convert a list of one type to a list of another type, right? So in here, it's going to iterate each fact in the facts list, and for each fact, we're going to execute a single statement, as denoted by this, and that statement is going to return what's going to be pushed into the new list. So it's going to return a text section. And we implement the instantiation of our text section, and then it's going to return it. So this is going to return a iterable kind of list of stuff. So iterable of a given type. So iterable is another thing in Dart that's kind of like a parent grandfather type of something that you can iterate over. It's something generic, but it's not useful to us. So what we can do is we need to get a list. So for iterable, we can just say toList. And toList will convert something that's iterable to an actual list type here. So yeah, that's it. That's the implementation. Let me return this. And then we need to use this list of text sections we return here. So we can't just call text sections like this and pass in location, because we want to add, because this is a list, we want to add it to the existing list of, we want to inject it into our list here. So this is already our list. We want to inject it here. And basically, we're going to do this. We're going to use Dart's spread operator. And it's called a cascade. Spread is coming out in the next version of Dart, and that's different. But cascade is two dots, and what cascade does is it takes a given item and it lets you run a function against it, or make an assignment or do something else. So I'm going to say the cascade operator, and then we're just going to say addAll. So there's a special function in Dart called addAll, and what that does is it appends all objects of something that's iterable to the end of the list. So if we have a given list here, we're going to say addAll, and then we're going to pass it something that's iterable. So text sections is iterable, And that's what we're going to do. So there's a lot to unpack there. But like this is kind of a common situation. In Dart 2.3, which is coming out very soon, you'll be able to use another operator called a spread operator, which is 3 dots, and kind of tack on list items like that more easily. So anyway, let's reload this screen, and yeah, there we have the text here. So all the text looks nice here, and that's it. Let's see what else we have to cover here. So if you want to go over what cascades are, I have links to what cascades are. I have a link to what the map function is. I have notes on it, but I also have a link to the actual documentation in the Dart website. So this is a link to it. And yeah, like, I would say play around with this stuff. And in summary, basically, I guess that's all we need to cover. So our app now dynamically adapts to whatever data we've defined. So in the next section, next lesson, we're going to be covering more advanced features and building out a new screen. So thanks for watching.